You know, you'd think the very first dinosaur found in Africa, maybe the whole southern hemisphere,
Mm-hmm.
you'd picture something huge, right? Obvious.
Yeah, like a T-Rex leg sticking out or something.
Exactly. But the real story, it turns out, is, well, it's something else entirely. Today we're doing a deep dive into Anthodon. It's this extinct reptile from the Permian.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite a tale, full of mistaken identities, the early days of digging up fossils.
It really is. And we've got some great sources lined up, the original science papers, historical accounts of finding it, even detailed descriptions of its body.
Okay.
Our mission really is to figure out what this creature was. Anthodon, the flower tooth, that name alone is pretty interesting, right?
Flower tooth. Yeah, I like that. It definitely catches your attention.
And we want to get why its discovery and all the initial confusion around it was actually pretty important.
Okay, so flower tooth.
Hmm.
Let's start there. Take us back. Where does the Anthodon story begin?
All right, so picture this. 1845. We're near Dassie Clip in what's now South Africa. You've got these two amateur geologists, William Guybon Atherstone and Andrew Geddes Bain. They stumble upon some fossils.
Amateurs.
Yeah, enthusiasts. And this is huge, like really historically significant. It's the very first fossil find in Africa, period. And the first in the whole southern hemisphere.
Wow. The absolute first.
A massive moment for science, really, even if, they didn't totally grasp what they'd found right away.
So the first fossils found in that entire half of the world. And did they think it was a dinosaur then?
Well, Bain, one of the discoverers, he looked at this piece of upper jaw they found, and he thought, this looks like Iguanodon. The dinosaur they knew from Europe.
Oh, okay. So he's making a connection to something known.
Exactly. He was so sure he actually named the place Iguanodon Hook.
Which means
Iguanodon Corner in Afrikaans.
he really committed to the idea that.
He did. Atherstone, the other guy, he published a little note about it in 1857, but apparently years later he was pretty annoyed that their find didn't get more attention back in London.
Yeah, I can imagine. You find the first fossil in half the world and crickets. That's rough.
Definitely.
So when did it get more official? When did it get the name Anthodon?
Okay, fast forward to 1876. The big name here is Richard Owen, a really prominent paleontologist at the time.
Right.
He looked at a bunch of these specimens from Bain and Atherstone's finds and formally named them Anthodon cerarius.
Then Anthodon, because of the teeth.
Precisely. He thought the teeth looked kind of like the petals of a flower, so Anthodon flower tooth. He picked out a partial skull, a jaw bit, some other fragments to be the official type specimens.
Flower tooth. It is a great name.
Right.
But it sounds like figuring out what it actually wasn't exactly simple.
Well, not at all. You had different experts weighing in. In 1882, you get Othniel Charles Marsh, another huge name in paleontology. He looks at a jawbone and goes, this looks like a stegosaur. So he assigns Anthodon to the Stegosauridae family.
A stegosaur, based on a jaw. Yeah. Then, jump to 1890, Richard Lydecker comes along. He correctly figures out it's a parasaur that's a totally different group of ancient reptiles we'll get into.
Okay, so not a dinosaur.
Right. But even Lydecker noted, yeah, the teeth do look a bit like stegosaur teeth, so you see the confusion.
Interesting.
And Lydecker also pointed out an error Owen made. He showed the fossils actually came from two different spots, not just one like Owen thought.
Okay, so the plot thickens. Different experts, different ideas. Now, you mentioned Owen originally did think it was a dinosaur. How did that mix-up happen with the flower tooth?
Ah, yes. This is where it gets really tangled. Owen's initial dinosaur idea, it seems like it came about because, well, other fossils were being found nearby
Right.
that actually were dinosaur skull bits.
Oh, so real dinosaur fossils were mixed in with the Anthodon stuff.
Exactly. You've got this jumble of bones from different animals in the same deposits. So you can see how early on someone might look at the whole collection and think, dinosaurs, right? Trying to sort out different puzzle pieces when they're all dumped in the same box. Makes sense.
It really underscores how important it is to carefully sort and analyze, especially with early finds.
And it wasn't just Anthodon causing these classification puzzles, right?
Yeah.
I think I saw some other names mentioned in the sources.
Yeah, definitely. Things were messy. So in 1913, you get two other species named from South Africa, Parasaurus parvis by Robert Broom and Perpappus parvis by Sidney Houghton.
Okay, more names.
And then, just to add another layer, in 1929, Franz Napsa takes that Parasaurus parvis and actually renames it Peranthodon, classifying that one as a stegosaurid.
Wow. Okay, so back to stegosaurs again. It's a real back and forth.
It really shows how dynamic things were. scientists were finding all this new stuff in South Africa and really grappling with how to categorize it all. Lots of different ideas flying around.
So lots of rethinking as they learn more. What about, there was another one mentioned, Anthodon minusculus. Was that like a smaller flower tooth from somewhere else?
Good catch. Yes, in 1932, Sidney Houghton, who named Propapus parvus, described this potential second species, Anthodon minusculus.
And where was that found?
This one was based on fossils found in Tanzania.
Ah, so outside South Africa.
Right, but later researchers looked at those Tanzanian fossils again and suggested, well, maybe they're actually the same species as the South African one, Anthodon cerarius.
So maybe not a separate species after all.
It's still a bit debated. Could be distinct species. Could just be, geographic variation within A. cerarius. The jury's kind of still out on A. minusculus.
Interesting. So possibly just the one main species, A. cerarius. Now, what happened to those other names you mentioned, Prehistoric parvus and Propapus parvus? Where do they fit in now?
Right, those two. Well, basically, they've been folded into Anthodon cerarius. The term scientists use is synonymized.
Synonymized, meaning?
Meaning, after looking again, especially at the main fossil evidence for those species, the holotype, which was a pelvis from near Dunedin, South Africa, scientists decided they weren't actually different animals. They were just more examples of Anthodon. So those names, Prehistoric parvus and Propapus parvus, they aren't considered valid species anymore. They're just Anthodon cerarius.
Got it. So the picture's clearing up. We've got Anthodon cerarius, our main flower tooth. So let's get to it. What did this thing actually look like?
Okay, so Anthodon wasn't like massive dinosaur, huge. It was a decent-sized reptile, though. Think about 1.2 to 1.5 meters long.
Okay, like a large dog or a small pony, maybe?
Something like that. And weight-wise, maybe around 80 to 100 kilograms. So yeah, substantial. It lived during the Changsingian period, which is like the very, very end of the Permian.
Right before the big extinction.
Exactly. And the really cool thing about it is this mix of features. It had some quite primitive traits.
Like what?
Like openings in the roof of its mouth called interpterygoid fenestrae. That's a more ancient reptilian feature. But then it had something super advanced for its time.
Which was?
Body armor. Like a turtle.
Whoa, turtle armor. Way back in the Permian, that seems...
Or early. It really was quite something. Its body was covered in these little bony plates embedded in the skin. They're called dermal ossicles.
Okay.
And then along its back, it had a pattern of larger armor plates. Very turtle-like in appearance. And maybe related to that armor, its tail was pretty short compared to some relatives who didn't have the heavy plating.
Oh, so well protected. Maybe not the speediest creature around with all that armor. What about the head and those famous teeth?
Yeah, the skull. It was actually quite small compared to the body, maybe 30 centimeters long, and pretty lightly built.
Okay.
Now, some other prehistorians had really knobbly ornamented skulls, but Anthodon's cheekbones were fairly smooth. They did, however, flare outwards and downwards at the back, forming these big, bony quadrijugal horns, technically.
Horns on the cheeks.
Sort of, yeah. Give it a distinctive look. And the lower jaw had bony bumps underneath, too, kind of like chin horns.
Okay.
And on the top, back part of the skull roof, some bones, the postparietals and tabulars, were fused together, which, again, is a more primitive condition.
Interesting mix. And the teeth, the reason for the name.
Yes, the teeth. They're the star, really. Anthodon had like 11 to 14 pairs of teeth in its jaws. They were small, pretty much all the same size and shape, and they fit tightly together, even overlapping slightly. And each individual tooth wasn't just a simple point. It had multiple little cusps along the edge, anywhere from 8 to 15 tiny points per tooth.
Wow, that is intricate.
Totally. And it's that pattern, the multiple cusps, the overlapping, that made them look sort of like leaves or flower petals. That's what Owen saw.
The flower tooth makes perfect sense now. And what does that tell us about its diet?
That kind of tooth is classic herbivore setup. Really good for grinding up tough plant material.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So not some terrifying predator, but a well-armored, plant-munching reptile from the end of the Permian. Okay, so let's place it officially. Where does Anthodon fit in the grand scheme of life, scientifically speaking?
All right, the classification goes like this. Domain Eukaryota, Kingdom Animalia, Phylum Chordata, standard stuff. Then it gets more specific. It's in the clade Parareptilia.
Parareptilia.
Yeah, that's an early branch of reptiles, kind of related to turtles, but separate from the ancestors of lizards, snakes, dinosaurs, birds, all that.
Okay.
Within Parareptilia, it's in the order Procolophonomorpha, then the clade Paraisauria, that's the main group it belongs to. More specifically, the clade Pumilio Paraisauria, And finally, genus Anthodon.
And the main species we've been talking about
Is Anthodon cerarius. That's the one.
Right. Okay, so we've journeyed from this surprising first find through all the scientific head-scratching to getting a pretty clear picture of this unique Permian reptile. So, boiling it all down, what are the key things to remember about our flower-toothed friend?
I'd say the main takeaways are Anthodon was a parasaur, an extinct reptile, not a dinosaur, lived in the late Permian, fossils mainly from South Africa, maybe Tanzania too.
Okay.
Crucially, its discovery was the first major fossil find in the southern hemisphere, but it got mixed up with dinosaurs found nearby early on.
Right, the initial confusion.
Exactly. Remember, the flower tooth name comes from its very unique multi-cusp teeth. And it had that really interesting combo of primitive skull features, but also advanced turtle-like armor.
That armor is definitely memorable. And this whole story, it really paints a picture of how science works, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
You have the excitement of discovery, then the maybe inevitable missteps as people try to figure things out with limited info. And then this gradual process of rechecking, finding more evidence, refining the understanding. It wasn't a dinosaur, sure, but the Anthodon story as well, it's a really key piece of early paleontology history, especially for Africa.
Totally agree. And maybe the thought to leave you, the listener, with is this. If something seemingly straightforward, like the first big fossil find in the southern hemisphere, had such a twisty, surprising start, well, what other things we think we know, historical facts, scientific ideas, what else might have a similarly complicated, maybe even slightly misleading origin story just waiting for someone to take a closer look?
That's a great point. Makes you want to question things a bit more.
Always good to keep that critical eye open.
Yeah.